welcome to Serving Nerve, the podcast or YouTube channel or whatever this is going to be, where I talk about the restaurant industry predominantly, but a host of other things that I just feel like talking about because I can. And I have no quality standards, and also I literally am just some dweeb in a bedroom that I have turned into an office. You might be wondering where the bed went. Don't ask. It is currently operating as a table, if that makes any sense. But anyways, we talk mainly on this channel that I'm now newly imposing about poverty, how to get out of poverty, how I got out of poverty, how I started serving, becoming a server, how I went from making not a lot of money as a server to making much better money as a server through experience and constant, antics and going from job to job, and how I moved from Canada, where I was originally born in Port Coquitlam, to Great Falls, Virginia, to Virginia Beach after having met a boy, to Floyd, Virginia, where I was in the middle of nowhere for a little while, a couple weeks, because I was not having it. It was whatever. Anyways, to Arlington, Texas, to Dallas, Texas, and how, I now have, normal things versus what I used to have, which was literally nothing. I came to America with nothing other than, a laptop, which is something, but you know what I mean. I literally had everything thrown in storage. I had no stuff. Lost my social media accounts because I had two-factor authentication on when I crossed the border, and I didn't have access to my phone number when I came across the border because I was roaming. Couldn't get the phone reinstated because it was 2021 times, if you know what I'm saying. And then whatever. Anyways, I got my social media accounts back, but it doesn't matter because they're kind of useless because it's social media, and accounts are incredibly expendable when it comes to social media anyway, so I don't know why I was that worried. But I did lose access to my banking information and, everything for a little while. I had no access to that, and I had to recontact them and confirm my identity and then change passwords and shut off two-factor on all these websites and stuff. So, I've had a really weird, complicated life, and it also came from me growing up in Canada in not the best circumstances. So I figured I would just kind of talk about all of these things, the life lessons I've learned, the mistakes that you should avoid making that I have made. In my 24 years of being on this planet, I've made, way too many mistakes, but also gotten stupidly lucky, psychotically so. I should definitely not be alive right now, but we are here. I definitely shouldn't have gotten lucky enough to get across the border, at the very least. Now, I've done everything legally, to be fair. I'm pretty sure I've done everything legally. In every capacity, I've operated on the basis of legalities, mainly because I'm a coward, not because I try to play by the book, but because I fear the book being thrown at me. I don't have a script, so I do pardon the rambling, but I just figured today we would talk about tip-out culture, because I've been serving, and everybody recently on the internet has been talking about tip-out culture. It's been a pretty trendy topic to talk about, so I just figured I would ramble about it and talk about my perspective in regards to such, and what people don't seem to understand when it comes to tip-out culture. So, being only in fast food before I left Canada, and having stopped in 2017, and living off my savings and doing commission work until I came across the border to America in 2021, I found that I started working in restaurants. I've always been exposed to food. I love food. I love cooking. Also, serving was just one of the most viable jobs. It's one of the most, transferable jobs. You can literally find a job anywhere. It's anywhere there's a restaurant, there's usually a job for you. There's no standards you need. You don't need assessments for criminal records, although that doesn't matter to me because I never go out. And blah, 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 blah. I started serving. I started working in a restaurant industry. I started out working at a upscale casual place that was very excessive with allergy protocols. So we had a lot of interesting testing and a lot of there's a way that you greet tables and stuff. There's things that you do. But in general, I started working in restaurants, and now we're in 2024. I've been serving for a few years. I've literally bounced from state to state to state, or state to state, and then town to town and place to place, county to county. I don't know. I don't know regions, all right? I failed geography. It's one reason why I started becoming a server, is because I literally don't know anything. But I must mention, I started serving. Started working in the restaurant industry. And let me make some distinctive claims that will help kind of enlighten you in regards to the whole concept of tipping culture, the whole concept of why there is this thing referred to as the 20% industry standard, particularly in restaurants, and why it's also kind of blown out of proportion, and people aren't making any more sense with tipping anymore because it doesn't make any sense. So let me break this down for you. Servers in restaurants are paid a base in the United States of $2.13 an hour. You'll not ever see that money usually. The likelihood of you seeing it is improbable because your taxes are going to eat that money just initially. You get paid what you're tipped minus tip out. Now, to explain tip out is basically you, as a server, operate with being tipped from the tables that you work with. Tables tip you for your service based on usually the racking up of a bill, and then they tip you a certain percentage of the bill, or sometimes they'll just throw you some money and not think about what the percentage is that they're supposed to tip. The 20% industry standard is perpetuated because we also have to pay tip out. Now, tip out is usually you have to tip out as a server your bartender that you work with, your back of house staff, so anyone who busses the tables. You also have hosts, people who will seat people and coordinate seating and, seat you, the server, which is why they also will sometimes get tip out. It really depends what the restaurant is, who's doing what, and what their tip out is going to be, because it's different literally for every restaurant. It's always different for every restaurant, every establishment you're going to be working in. It's going to always change. So your tip out's going to change, but it's based on usually a percentage of total sales that the server makes, not total tips. Total sales. Now, explaining total sales. The thing about total sales is say you sell $100 of stuff, $100 of food and drink. There's a certain percentage of that $100 of sales that is literally going to be paid out in tip out, no matter what your tips are. Say it's 3%. Say it's 3% of total sales paid through tip out. You as the server, for that $100, and usually you're going to have way more racked up, or you're going to be in trouble as a server if you're only fucking doing $100 worth of sales. That's just sad. But anyways, if you, the server, $100, you sell $100 worth of stuff, whatever, you pay a certain percentage on that $100 to other people in the restaurant. Depending on how the restaurant operates, it's going to be your back of house staff, your front of house staff, blah, 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 the dude who cleans the bathrooms. You never know. Could be anybody. Kitchens, whatever. But in general, say you have that $100, 3% of that goes to your back of house staff or whoever you get to tip out, and guess what? That's $3. So the 20% rule is based on trying to give you an actual average wage because you're getting paid literally only in tips, but you also have to tip other people out. So the 20% is not yours. You don't actually make, say that table, that $100 table, say it's a $100 table, it's just one table. Say they tip you $20, you don't see $20, you see $17. Then that gets taxed because we all pay taxes. And maybe you don't get taxed on your initial tip out or your tips that you receive because of a certain, operation that your restaurant upholds. Sometimes, depending on the state that you work in, the restaurant you work in, you might have to pay all of your taxes at the end of the year. It becomes quite brutal. Or you have to pay daily. But at the end of the day, either way, you're not going to see that $17. It's going to be lower than $17. It's a certain deduction from the taxation. So that's why the 20% rule exists. The 20% rule exists because you don't actually get 20% of your tips. I've never worked in a place that actually gives you 20% of the tips that you make on a 20% tipping scale. And that's if tables actually tip you 20%, because most of the time, depending on where you work, it varies. But a lot of people do not tip 20%. They might tip 10%. You never know. They might tip 5%, 15%, or nothing because they don't know about tipping, and they also don't care about tipping if they know. It's just how it goes. But the difference with the problem with tipping culture is now you've got other places like McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, Starbucks, blah, 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 blah. They hold the iPad up to you and they say tip whatever on this. When they actually get paid a base wage, they get paid minimum wage. Now, when you're a server and you get paid that $2.13 an hour, if you hypothetically don't get the tips that you need to build it up to minimum wage, your employer does have to suffice with giving, or has to pay you that on whatever your paycheck is. So say you work 40 hours, but you only make like 20 hours worth of money for your laborious efforts in tips or whatever the case is, and they have to top it up. But a lot of the time, depending on where you're working, you're never going to see that margin because also it's so inconsistent, and then depending on when they pay you, if it's daily, or you're going to have to look at all of it at the end of the year when tax season comes up and assess your hours to payment to whatever. So that's why, whatever. Anyways, other places get paid actual wages. If you're working at I'm not saying it's a great wage, all right? Hear me out. I'm not trying to tell you it's a good wage, all right? Minimum wage blows bubbles. But if you're working at these other places, there's a higher base wage, which is why the tips at those places are more likely to be tip pooled, meaning they're collected and then split amongst everybody who's working that day instead of at a restaurant where you just get whatever tips you get. Now, or, with all the additional math and all the crap. But, also, that isn't always true because there are some restaurants that do tip pooling. I've worked at some restaurants, aka one restaurant that's done tip pooling. I liked it there. Unfortunately, couldn't stay around. But, other places, they get a base wage. The tips, not necessary to hit that base wage. Service industry is different per establishment. Everybody gets paid a different wage. I've also worked at places that do not just tip you $2.13 an hour. They might tip you not tip you. Some places will pay you a higher wage because the tips are just that bad and they know it. And some other places will just pay you minimum wage because they don't expect you to get tipped that much, or they do tip pooling or whatever. And the annoying thing is, though, when we're operating in a society now where you have to Uber, you pay tips. You have to get food delivered, you pay tips. Even though these other people do also get money from just doing the service, we're always asked to tip. We're literally always asked to tip. So now we're tipping with, driving, delivery services, getting your coffee in the morning at Starbucks, even though you're paying like $8 for the coffee or whatever, and the girl's literally just turning a machine. She gets paid minimum wage anyways, blah, 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 blah. That's where people... we don't need to denounce all of tipping culture. We need to denounce the prospect of it being ridiculous tipping antics, in my personal opinion. Just because, listen, if tipping didn't exist, I'd still be poor. I'm not gonna lie. There have been a lot of places I've worked where I haven't made, insane amounts of money. I'm not rich. Trust me when I say I'm not rich. I think I'm rich in life because I've gotten so lucky to get this opportunity to be where I'm at now. And I would never take back any of my hardships. In spite of me always being complaintive and rude, which you'll probably hear me be complaintive and rude and annoying on this channel, but I would never take it back. But serving at a restaurant is very different when you get paid 20% there than you, the person working at places that don't do tip out, that pay minimum wage, and then they have that goddamn iPad that exists particularly to ask the dude who's getting McDonald's burger, do you want to tip us 20% on this garbage food that we actually just micro nuke or whatever? Versus doing wine service, bottle service, getting cocktails, accommodating for tables, accommodating for allergies, accommodating for this, coursing meals, firing orders at the right time so that the food hits the table at the appropriate time, cleaning up the tables, doing your side work, which is a whole other story. We've got to talk about side work. We got to talk about everything on this channel because honestly, it gets so extensive and there's so much to talk about that people just really don't know. It varies from restaurant to restaurant. Every single restaurant, every single fast food establishment, every single, minimum wage job, they all have different things that go into you getting paid what you're paid. But the concept of tipping culture, people just go oh, screw tipping, I'm not going to tip or whatever. There are certain places where the tips are actually the person's wage. And the tips you give aren't even the wage they just get. It's the wage that they get plus, the back of house gets and, all the teenagers who run as hosts. Because most hosts, ironically, all the places I've worked, the hosts are usually the youngest and they're usually, barely adults. But, anyways... I'm going ahead of myself, but the gist of what I'm trying to tell you is tipping culture is a very extensive topic, and I'm not for tipping everybody 20% when they get paid a base minimum wage or whatever, and every time you get a Starbucks coffee or something like that, because it starts getting ridiculous, and then you end up just being well, now I can't do anything because everything costs an arm and a leg to do. But there is a difference between that and going out to a restaurant that provides you appropriate restaurant services and being served by a server who's going to be relying on that tip that you provide to just feed themselves. It gets extensively complex. So I really would like to have more conversations about tipping culture, have more conversations with you, whoever whoever actually can tolerate my incessant rambling. Anyways, yeah. I don't even know if I gave you my name. I don't remember. I literally can't remember. Anyways, my name's Sage. Hi, how you doing? Sage like the spice, you know. Have fun with the identity theft in that regard, I guess. I need to shut up. Anyways, do tell me what other things you would like to converse about if anyone ever sees these videos. There's going to be lots and lots that we have to talk about in regards to tipping and service industries and restaurant industries. But also, like, honestly, at a certain point, we're going to exhaust all that information. There's also a lot of naughty, evil things that go on in restaurants that nobody wants to know about, or maybe everybody wants to know about, but nobody's willing to talk about, which is some of the stuff that I really want to talk about. So anyways, yeah. But outside of that, like, I've got a lot of, like, weird antics that I feel like would be kind of fun to throw on this platform, whichever platform I put this on. So, like, I don't know. I'll just tell you about all my weird stories and stuff, because I got a lot of, like, weird stuff. But anyways, Slater dudes. I'll see you next time.